Well, hello and welcome to Wild Vittles. My name is Chris Smith, and I venture to guess this is the best wild game cooking podcast you've likely never heard of. I have a real treat for us tonight, and I cannot believe that I have taken this long to get to one of these recipes. This is going to be a venison cowboy goulash. This is not the goulash you hear about like from Hungarians, although it does have paprika in it. It's based on a recipe from Cowboy Kent Rollins, one of my favorite dudes. I'm going to go ahead and get these onions into my enamel cast iron here to get started so that they can start softening while I talk. So goulash, when you hear about goulash, it generally refers to a Hungarian dish that generally has beef, could have pork, lots of paprika, kind of a hearty, almost like a stew. I happen to have lived in Hungary, so I can speak with authority in that I've had real Hungarian goulash made by fantastically talented Hungarians. This is not that. This is a cowboy rendition that is essentially kind of a very fancy hamburger helper almost, because it's going to have macaroni noodles in it, but far superior in taste and quality. I'm using tonight ground elk, but you could use any ground venison or beef. But the nice thing about using ground venison is you don't have to drain the fat because there's no fat in it. Especially in my ground, I don't put any fat in most of it. So let me start off with the first ingredient I've put into the pot, and I've kind of got a medium. I think I'm going to turn it up to a high heat. Not high, 7 out of 10, medium high, is a large onion. I didn't have a large onion, so I put 2 small onions in there. And it's a yellow, kind of sweet onion. Could be a white or yellow or sweet. I don't think I put a red in there. And what we're going to do is we're going to saute that and get these onions soft. And in the meantime, I also have sitting in front of me, and I'll pull it up in a minute, is I think 1.75 pounds of venison, which this is ground elk. I have used like less, gone like 1.5 pounds, 1.25 pounds. The recipe, the official recipe actually calls for 2 pounds, but you got a little bit of leeway there. These are guidelines, right? So we need to let that get going, and while it is, I can use some of this non-productive time to go ahead and get some other things ready, like my spices. So bear with me. I need to grab a bowl to pour some spices in that we'll be using later. I'm going to go ahead and pre-measure and then throw that in. All right, I got me a handy-dandy bowl here, and I'm going to put in smoked paprika. The smoked paprika really gives a nice flavor to it. You could use regular paprika, but I would recommend you stick with the smoked because it just has a real distinctive flavor to it. And we're going to use a tablespoon of smoked paprika. Now, it's not time to put it into the dish. And what I'm going to do now, and I would recommend, like, if you're in a hurry, and I'm always in a hurry, is to go ahead and measure out things, open things while other dishes are cooking. So, like right now, I'm kind of stuck and I can't do much while the onions are sauteing, or when I've got the when I've got the ground meat, in this case elk, browning. All you can do is kind of stand there and look pretty, right? Well, no, you can do a few other things. So I'm gonna measure out my paprika. A tablespoon of that is done, and then you can put in salt and pepper. But this specific recipe by Cowboy Kent Rollins, and I would recommend you go to his website, is that you use about 1.5 teaspoons of his seasoning, which I absolutely like his cooking and his seasoning. I buy his seasoning, actually. So I'll put this up. For those watching YouTube, you can see his smiling face on this container. And, some people may think that guy sounds funny, but he sounds like me, except, maybe, 15, 20 years ago when I was living in Oklahoma. You kind of get a bit of a twang. Maybe I still have a twang and I just don't know it. I'm going to eyeball about 1.5, almost 2 tablespoons to go in there, because I think that is really good seasoning. But like I said, salt and pepper will work fine. So now this paprika and Red River Ranch seasoning is all ready to go for when I get my meat prepared here. Now I'm putting in a pound. This is about 1.75 pounds. Like I said, the recipe calls for 2 pounds, but I'm going to put in what I have in the way of ground, and we're going to brown this real quickly. And I set this meat out. I say set out, I put it in the refrigerator last night, but I did my handy kind of quick thaw method. I take, I when I do my ground meat, I put them in those plastic bags, and then I'll, twist tie them and put a hog ring at the top. So when I get ready to defrost it, I actually just take it and put it in a Ziploc bag, put that Ziploc bag in a very big Tupperware type container, fill that thing with cold water so that you've got cold water all around that frozen meat. And that kind of helps, like an ice cube in water will melt faster than if you just had an ice cube sitting in the refrigerator. There's just more transfer of heat out of that frozen meat. And, by the time I get here today and I'm working on this dish, this meat's fully thawed, almost as if I had it set out for like a full 24 hours, maybe 48 hours. Because my freezer is super duper cold. I mean, we're talking sub-zero. It takes it some time. Plus, nearly 2 pounds of ground. That's quite a bit of mass. Now, once we get this ground meat all browned, it's going to come together pretty quickly. So I'll read through kind of what the ingredients are, and I have a really stained recipe paper, and I can almost do this from memory now, but it's good to have it all here just in case, especially to list it off for you. But like I said, 2 pounds of ground venison, a large yellow onion. I had 2 small ones. That's fine. A tablespoon of smoked paprika. You saw me measure that out already. 1 to 1.5 tablespoons of either Red River Ranch or kind of a salt and pepper to taste. 3 cloves of garlic, minced, and I cheat. I have a pre-minced container here, a jar that I'm going to put it in. 1 15-ounce can of stewed tomatoes. You're going to see this is very tomato heavy. 1 15-ounce can of diced tomatoes. And 1 6-ounce can of tomato paste, which my wife actually bought a 12-ounce can, so I'm going to have to use half of that. I'll be wasteful. A 10-ounce can of whitetail, which is, diced tomatoes and green chilies. His recipe calls for half a cup of water. I never seem to need that. It also calls for a cup of chicken broth. I never use that. And then 2 tablespoons of soy sauce. And this is why you'll see us not put much salt in this, is because the soy sauce has salt in it. 2 bay leaves. And then a Hatch green chili, roasted and peeled. But I'm not in New Mexico, so I'm not going to be able to do that. He does say that in lieu of that, you can take a can of diced green chilies, a 4-ounce can. But I'm tempted, I have a 4-ounce can, but I'm tempted to use some of my fresh, I have a big, beautiful jar of kind of medium chilies that are green Hatch chilies that I want to try, but it's a 16-ounce jar, so I probably will use, I might try putting half of that in there. I'm a little bit worried it may be a little spicy, and my wife might not be thrilled with the outcome, but hey, live and learn. And then we're going to mix all that together. It's going to brown. All those ingredients are not brown. It's going to kind of marry up and make a wonderful dish. And then when that's ready, we're going to put in 2 cups of large elbow macaroni and let that cook for 20 minutes. And then that'll be it. It's a pretty straightforward dish. It'll feed a lot of folks. And in fact, I've doubled the recipe before. One time I went to my in-laws and fed my father-in-law, my family, and my sister-in-law's family. And everybody loved it. Now, I did cook beef for that because they're all suspicious of venison. But they loved it. And I think that I could have put whitetail deer in there and they would have never known. There is a fine line on feeding some people something they don't understand what it is. And it kind of depends on your relationship with those people, I think. With my children, I often would feed them something and then they'd be like, hey, that was really good. And I was like, hey, that's pronghorn antelope. And they'd be like, oh my gosh. Because, dadgummit, they had a preconceived notion about what they thought it was good or what was bad. And they approached it from an unbiased standpoint and then realized that's pretty tasty. So, I think that was within my prerogative as a father. And they're, semi-adults approaching adulthood. Okay, well, this meat is what I would call browned. And I'm going to start to put in the ingredients. Now, who is this dish really good for? I think it's good for families. I think it's good for anybody. It really isn't spicy as long as you don't put spicy ingredients in it. So what do I mean by that? If you put in Rotel, you have an opportunity to put in like original or mild or hot. This is original, and I don't find it hot. My wife is pretty particular about these things, and she doesn't find this hot. The Red River Ranch gives it a bit of a peppery kick, so that's something. I think that the Hatch Green chilies that I normally put in the 4-ounce can, they also have those in mild and hot. So if you buy mild, not going to be hot if you're concerned. But if you like hot, and I do, I tend to try to find hot. So it kind of depends who's eating it and when. So what I'm putting in right now is I just put in Rotel and then diced tomatoes. So that was 1 can of Rotel, or tomatoes and chilies, diced chilies. A can of diced tomatoes, and this is kind of like small chunks cut up in a can. And this, that's the tomato paste. You should do a 6-ounce can of tomato paste, and my wife accidentally bought a 12-ounce, so I'm going to have to guesstimate kind of a half of this. And you might be like, why do you put the paste in? The paste really kind of thickens it up and really gives it a terrific color. So I would not skip the paste. I think I'm overdoing this. I'm sometimes an overdoer. And it is a lot of tomato. It's a very tomatoey dish. But I like tomatoes. I think tomatoes are a good thing. It's good for you too. Sometimes tomato paste is a booger to get off of things. So I'm going to put that right there. And then the last can I'm going to put in is stewed tomatoes. I wonder how they stew tomatoes. I have to look that up. If I had a producer working for me, somebody to do research, that's something they could tell me. I smelled the can and tomato sauce and tomatoes make me cough, which is ironic because I like tomatoes. So we've imparted all of our tomatoes into this. I'm going to put in garlic. How much garlic do we need? I think 3 cloves. Yep. 3 cloves of garlic. And if you get this canned garlic, a teaspoon is a clove. So I'm going to scoop out 3 teaspoons. Always be careful when you're cooking with garlic. You don't want to cook it like you would an onion because it will burn and it will taste bad. So don't do that. You'll be sad. All right, we have the garlic. I'm going to put in, we pre-measured out the Red River Ranch, and you could do salt and pepper and the paprika. So I'm going to put that in the dish as well. Some of it's sticking on the bottom of my bowl, so I have to scrape this out. I may have some loss of paprika. I really think the paprika is extremely critical because it imparts a specific taste. I just can't imagine this dish without the paprika. So I'm going to make sure I'm kind of putting my fingers in this bowl and getting every little bit out. We're going to put in soy sauce, and I believe it's 2 tablespoons. Double check. Yep. 2 tablespoons, so I have a tablespoon here. I'm going to count this out. Glug, 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 glug. 1 tablespoon. Glug, 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 glug. 2 tablespoons of delicious soy sauce. Give this all a really good mix. starting to really look like the goulash that I know, the cowboy goulash that is. And I think bay leaves, I may put a little bit more. Can't help but use a little bit more of this paste. If I got it available, why not? I think I'm going to put in these fancy green hatch chilies instead of using the can. If I would recommend, this is an experiment, so I'd recommend anybody else use like this can of hatch green chili. But I'm going to try this larger version, this 505 Southwestern medium flame roasted Hatch Valley green chilies. It's 16 ounces. I'm supposed to use 4, so I'm going to use 8, because if something is good, then twice as much is gooder, I think. Hopefully. We'll see. That smells good. And it's very unscientific how I'm going to measure out half. It's going to be like, pour it out and then look. All right, that's probably a third. I'm going to call that a half. That looks delish. Let me double check while I'm stirring this up what my thing says here. I got the paprika, the onion, seasoning, the garlic, the tomatoes, rotel, soy sauce. Yep. So all I got to do now is put in bay leaves. I'm going to put in 2 bay leaves. I'm kind of doing this on an accelerated basis. In the official recipe, you're supposed to let this simmer about 20 minutes and then put the macaroni in and cook it for about 20 minutes. And I'm trying to land this in at the top of the hour. So I'm going to cheat and fast track it and only let it simmer for about 10 and then put in the macaroni. And I bet you it's going to be fine. These are really kind of pitiful little bay leaves. I think I'll put in 3 little ones. Is somebody going to eat that and then be like, if you put half a bay leaf more, that would have been better. How dare you? All right, this is going to simmer. We're going to fade to black, and through the magic of the video, I'm going to materialize back, and 10 minutes is going to have passed, and we'll put in the macaroni. So I'll see you in a minute. All right. Well, if we follow the rules, welcome back. If we follow the rules, we would have simmered this for 20 minutes. I've only simmered it for 10 because I'm a rule breaker like that. And so we're going to put in, it says 2 cups of macaroni. I would gauge this based on how much meat you have in there. If you only have a pound of meat, do not put 2 cups of macaroni in there because it's going to overpower your macaroni. You're having a macaroni with a little bit of meat. I like a lot of meat with a little bit of macaroni. It's up to you. So I'm going to put in probably 1.5, 1 2/3. You might be like, Chris, why don't you get a 2/3 cup? Well, because I like to eyeball it. Because, by God, this is what you do when you're a chef or a home cook. We'll see if I can not spill this. And I haven't added any water or broth to this. It does call for a half cup of water and then about that much broth as well. I've never needed it in there, but if for whatever reason, if your dish looks dry, make sure there is enough liquid for the macaroni to kind of soak up, and it will soak it up a little bit. So I've got a cup here. I'm going to pour in there, and I'm going to do just under another cup. Yeah, that's almost a cup. I think it'll be all right. I got quite a bit in there. And we're going to let this cook. So what you're going to do is cover it. Well, got to mix it in. I wouldn't recommend leaving it on top. You'll have a very unhappy meal if that's the case. But mix it in good. And then I'm going to put the lid on, and I'm going to set a timer for 20 minutes. And, when you get thereabouts 20 minutes, come and try one of the noodles, fish it out with a spoon. And if it's al dente, then your meal is ready because the meat and everything is done. What we're doing now at this point is just getting the noodles cooked correctly. And I'm going to set this probably on a 4 thereabouts because it's good and hot already, so it's not going to take much to simmer it. And with the lid on, it'll be plenty hot. And there you go. So now the hardest part is we have to wait. So fade to black. We'll come back and you'll see our wonderful meal. Thanks. Well, welcome back. So we have let this simmer for 20 minutes. And I did kind of sneak a bite in between to try to test my macaroni, and it wasn't quite done. So I let it go for another couple minutes. So I've been about 22 minutes. And I should have mentioned that the recipe called for a little water and a little broth in there. I kind of like mine not to be so soupy, so it's pretty thick. So it would, you ever heard of the spoon test for chili? This is what it would do in the goulash as well. For those of you who are audio only, I stuck my spoon in the middle of the goulash. It's still standing up straight. So it's pretty thick, and I like it like that from a goulash perspective. That's my personal preference. If you want to make it a little bit, have more liquid to it, experiment and try the, putting in some broth and some water per the recipe. And I'll put that in the show notes as the link to Cowboy Kent Rollins because he's the inspiration for what I'm doing here from a wild game perspective. I'm mixing it up just to kind of make sure that the stuff on the bottom is getting to the top and the bottom so that we have an equal kind of perspective on distribution of moisture in there because it could be a little dry on the bottom. So I'm going to scoop out a little bit, and I'm kind of holding this up for the YouTube folks to see. It's a beautiful blend of meat, peppers, noodles, tomatoes, and it looks, like a good ratio. So I must have made a good call on how much I put in there from a perspective of the noodles because I was worried my macaroni would be too much. I did sneak a bite while I was testing it earlier. And, if you noticed, I experimented by putting in a different kind of green hatch chili, and they're like a medium heat. This stuff's pretty hot. I don't know if my wife's going to eat it or not. I like it, but it's hot. And if I say it's hot, it's pretty hot. So let me take a bite here. I'm waiting for it to cool down a little bit. So bear with me as I blow on this so I don't burn my mouth. I'm trying to get a noodle in there, a little bit of meat. One of my favorites. I really recommend this. And it's great for taking camping, to do it on a camping trip. It's great at the house. It's great for leftovers. It'll freeze. I've taken it on camping trips frozen. And it's got a very distinctive taste. I think because of the combination of the smoked paprika and that Red River Ranch seasoning, the chili peppers in there, it's just tastes like the Southwest. So highly recommend it. Please give it a try and go look at Kent Rollins. His recipes are fantastic. This is kind of when I plead with you, please, if you can, if you're listening to me, give me a 5-star rating on podcasts and a review. I'd really appreciate a review. It helps people find the show. If you're on YouTube, really appreciate that you subscribe and that you give me a thumbs up. And if you see me on Instagram, man, like my post, subscribe. Let me know what you think. So on Instagram, I'm the Wild Vittles Podcast. On podcast, audio only, I am Wild Vittles Podcast. And on YouTube, I am Wild Vittles Podcast. So a very consistent approach. I appreciate you. Go out and try new things and enjoy yourself and your wild game. And together, let's be wild game cooks. Thank you. Good night and good luck.